Welcome, everybody. Tonight we are looking at Unit 3. The topics for Unit 3 are Industry 4.0 and this concept of digitalization. I do have the PowerPoint for this unit pulled up here, and I am going to go into PowerPoint mode here to go through it. So let me get my slideshow going here, and then I'm going to flip my screens and then do a little bit of arranging over here on screen number 2 where you guys can't see, but I like to have a little preface of what's coming next here. All right. Okay, recapping, stuff that we did last week. If you remember, we looked at a bunch of different topics and hopefully you guys picked up some new thoughts. The agenda for tonight is really to go through these two main bullets. Like first, we're going to talk about basically what is digitalization, which is different than digitizing, by the way, and how we use AI in a bunch of different industries. And this is a really kind of an interesting discussion to have around these materials. There are a lot of slides, so I don't kind of want to spend too much time on superfluous slides. So we're just going to kind of move forward here. And we're going to, at least in this section, we're going to talk about these 4 topics. And that is, what is digitalization, comparing it with digitizing, why is it happening, and how can you be successful with it? So like the first thing you have to figure out is what the heck it is, right? So definition formally is the conversion of written and oral communication to electronic messaging that everyone understands, right? Not that just computers understand, right? But that human beings can understand. And it says, simply put, communication is now in a digital form that can be processed and manipulated by a computer. All right. And think about that. In the past, if you would talk to people, right? We didn't have like all these phones and smart devices and recorders and video cameras and ring doorbells and all that kind of stuff. It was just a private conversation, right? And even if you sent somebody a letter and it was handwritten and your writing was really bad, some people might not be able to read it, right? But now that everything becomes digital, well, now it can be analyzed, it can be looked at, it can be sorted, filtered, run algorithms on it, etc. Right? So that data that we generate from that process is valuable. And so whenever, like, for example, you are having like a discussion on social media, you bet that that platform is monitoring your communications and gathering data and doing all sorts of things with it, and I can go on and on about that. All right, so let's look at these 2 different terms here and what they mean. All right, so to digitalize with the Z in it, right, and the extra L basically, is to transform everything that an organization is doing using a digital approach. So, for example, maybe in the old days, your business, and really a great example is like a doctor's office, right? 20 years ago, you'd walk into a doctor's office, and maybe you have to go back a little farther in some offices, and they would keep your records on paper, right? The doctor would pull out your folder, your chart, right? It was a chart. And then you'd visit and they'd take some notes. And the only people that could read it was basically, the transcriptionist or whatever. Some doctors would take verbal notes and then send them off to a transcriptionist to type them in to a computer. But everything was basically on paper. And ironically, the medical field is one of those areas in record keeping that was the last to digitalize their content. But now think about it, in most workplaces, like you're filling out a time card or you're filling out a form. I mean, rarely are you doing that on a physical piece of paper. You're doing it electronically. The information is captured. So it's all captured. It's all digital. It's really easy to use. It's really easy to read. The process of digitizing, though, is different. It is the conversion from physical format to a digital one. So it's assuming that you started with paper. One thing a lot of people don't realize is one of the technologies that we look at as being AI, right? And this is really kind of an interesting thing, is the ability for an AI to look at an image of something and describe it this is really kind of an interesting thought. Or uh, to have an AI look at text from a photograph of a document and then convert that to actual words. And that process, by the way, is called OCR. And what astounds, I think, most young people is OCR technology has been around, I think, since the early 80s or late 70s, where you could scan a document, like a physical piece of paper, and it would turn into an electronic document. And then it wasn't always perfect and you'd have to fix it a lot. But man, that process has gotten really good now, right? You can take a picture with your phone, turn it into a PDF, and edit the text. I mean, it's all there, right? So that process of digitizing, or if you have like, here's another example. If you have like a old fashioned photograph that's printed or slides, right? You can scan those and turn them into digital images and then edit them with Photoshop versus digitalize, which is to take it with a digital camera right out of the bat, and you don't have to worry about converting it, right? So that's the difference between the two. So to digitize means to switch from the old formats to the new, right? So why do people digitalize? Why do they just put it all in the electronic domain? Well, basically, there are organizations, right? And they're using Uber here as an example of how like Uber and Lyft came around and kind of blew taxis out of the water. Before Uber and Lyft was a thing, you mean you'd have to call a cab company, like in Milwaukee, you would, right? But it's not like in New York City where you just stand on the street and raise your arm and the taxi stops. Literally, I mean, if you guys have ever been to New York, Chicago's a little bit like that, but in New York, people don't own cars. They really do, or they used to take cabs, and there's still a lot of cabs in New York. But when Uber came around, it was all app driven. You would just load up the app on your phone, connect your credit card, put in an address where you want to go. The little map comes up. The driver pulls up. You know what I mean? It was all on the app. Wonderful, right? Super easy to use, and in most cases, it was cheap as well. It does improve the efficiency of certain things. So can you imagine, like, if you walked into a doctor's office and they give you a paper form and you fill it out by hand, maybe your handwriting's not so great, and then they hand it to some secretary that maybe isn't great with their English skills, and then she's or he is typing it into a computer system, and they get your name wrong or your address wrong. And I think probably all of us have been in that situation where you get like, you go to a place and they misspell your name. It's because somebody entered it into the computer wrong, right? So that's a big thing, right? So like manual processes often lead to mistakes and problems, and that's one of the reasons why organizations are moving away from it. Um, the other thing is that they talk here about improving the user experience. Um, so they have this concept table of using interactive AR at Pizza Hut while waiting for food, and what they mean by that is basically where, and I don't know how many of you have ever ordered from like the Pizza Hut website. Like if you order from their website and you get a pizza and you say you want pepperoni on it, they have a little picture of it with pepperonis, right? And they're like, wait, I only want it on half. I want sausage on the other half, and they have a picture of that too, right? And that's not exactly what we're talking about here, but the fact that they're kind of helping you visualize it and go, yeah, that's the pizza I want, right? And notice that they have a little example here of people sitting at a table, and you can kind of put your pizza together with anything. Now, I'll be real frank. I haven't eaten at a Pizza Hut or a Pizza Hut pizza maybe since like before the millennium. I'll be real frankly, right? It's not like my favorite pizza. However, I have been to places like Olive Garden, right? Have you guys ever been there, where they have like basically like a tablet at the table, and you don't have to talk to the waitress, you just do it on the tablet, right? And it's the same kind of thing. But the Pizza Hut experience was one where you'd pick mushrooms and you could place them on the pizza and see it, right? And that's really kind of appealing. All right, so some of the side benefits: you can increase the customer base, right? So like, everybody's carrying a phone, everybody's up on the web, you capture their information through their devices, and it saves all this paper and hassle, and the information is instantly captured. So like you get more customers in principle. A lot of organizations are using AI to predict customer behavior. So like if I hop on Amazon and I'm always looking at computer parts, chances are when I hop on Amazon, they'll show me a lot of computer parts. It makes sense. Um, you know, things are generally more efficient that way. It costs less because now we're removing a step in the process, and generally you have better control. Because like if you're like putting your information in on an app on a screen, you know how to spell your name correctly, right? So it's not going to go into the system incorrectly, and you can see how that could really improve things, right? More benefits. So you can also integrate stuff that's already been digitized. So if you have documents that have been digitized and images and audio and video that have been digitized, you can integrate that with the new materials, right? So I think that's kind of interesting. Um, Here's kind of like a weird example, but like when um, streaming came out, right, and everybody was like, um, streaming MP3s. There was a time when that was kind of a brand new thing online. It was like a new technology, and everybody was moving away from like I have cassettes and I have CDs and I have albums, right? And then some people would go to the trouble of ripping their CDs, where they would extract the digital information and then put it on their iPod, right? So they didn't have to buy it from Apple Music or whatever. Um, and so yeah, that process is basically allows those two to kind of commingle, really, right? So and by the way, it's always better to have your own physical media or your own digital versions of something if you purchase them rather than stream them. It's always better quality, just a little tip. Better accessibility and better information exchange, sure, because if it's electronic, I can put it in a folder, share it, whatever, other people can access it. I don't have to go through all these mechanics of like printing it, mailing it, or whatever. If the data is right there and it's electronic, I can get an instant response. I can look something up immediately. Like maybe the moment after, like for example, if I went to a point of sale system at a store and they captured my sale, the manager might be able to look up the details of that sale the moment after payment was made. It's right in the database. They don't have to like wait for the cashier to close out and look at the receipts. You know what I mean? It's in the database already, right? And because it's all digital, well, now we can analyze it. And there's an advantage to analyzing things because we can, predict and know what people are doing. All right. So the next point is like, how do you like get to the point where your organization starts to employ these strategies, right? Um, so these are just kind of general guidelines, and this is very, very business-like. This is the kind of stuff that we would talk about in the business administration program. And how do I know that? Because I've studied business aside from computer science as well, right? Because I thought that was going to be my path. Well, okay, so the necessary steps are clear goal and purpose, right? It's easier to get to where you're going if you know where you're going, right? Like why are you making the records, electronic, you well, if your leadership supports it, it's going to probably go a lot better than if they don't, right? It also empowers workers to change, but there's always this little caveat with the change word in business, because guess what happens to people? They get comfortable in their systems, even if they're inefficient, right? So people are often reluctant to change too. Ideally, the digital information will make it easier to communicate things because it's all digital. So I can share it, forward it, highlight it, whatever. And then training people to learn how to do this stuff is kind of a thing too. And I can just think of even Gateway alone. Like when I started at Gateway and I got hired and went through the HR process. I had to go in person to HR and fill out a bunch of paperwork and sit there with somebody and, well, you got to sign this and you got to sign that and you got to check this box and all that stuff. And then they would take it and type it into their systems, and then I would get my paycheck and my benefits and all that stuff. A couple years back, I picked up a side teaching gig for a different technical college, and they interviewed me online. I provided all my paperwork online. I did all my HR stuff online. I've never been there in person. How weird is that, right? So what's the advantage? I don't have to drive, right? And once again, the data doesn't have to be fudged or messed up. All right. So, all right, we talked about a bunch of impacts of AI in different industries, and you guys have had homework on this, right? Like how does 5G affect this, and how does IoT affect that, right? And you start thinking about these industries and what technology does to them, you know, and when you think about this, and we're not going to sit here and answer these questions because we could be here all night doing so. Um, but a lot of us now have experienced AI technologies in a number of different ways, right? Um, and think about it, right? Are you using, for example, an AI chat bot regularly to do things? Maybe it's just to do a simple search like I did before in the data analytics class, or what I was just doing here, um, or I use AI engines to generate videos for this class, like goofy stuff like that, right? Um, and how does it really apply to our lives? Is it value added? I guess is a really good thing too. And do you think there's an improvement as a result of it? And do we have to improve somehow in order to use these tools? These are all really valid questions and ones you should think about as you use these technologies. Just because there is this technology or tool doesn't mean it's good or beneficial, right? And that's one thing you got to always kind of like question things, when you're in these fields. Just because something new came out doesn't mean it's going to be around forever. you know All right, so let's kind of dig in here a little bit. So we're going to look at a bunch of these different industries and the effects of AI on these industries. Now, once again, the slides in here are a little bit dated, right? But the concepts still apply. And wherever I can, I'm going to pepper in additional content and information. And if you guys have examples that you can think of and you want to, speak up in the chat or whatever, and right now I'm looking in there and you guys are talking Skynet, Boston, and LimeWire. Okay. All right. Next, you're going to say MySpace and Napster, right? Yeah, I'm sure. All right. So for each one of these industries, we're going to kind of look at uh, where they come from, their background, what problems they have, and some of the AI solutions that are already being used, right? So this is all right. Let's focus on retail first. And all right, so they have a thing here, but I'm going to show you like I queued up in my browser here because okay, so I'm a big fan of shopping at Woodman's, right? For whatever reason, they're cheap, right? They got everything. It's huge. They're open 24 hours, um, and it was really, I guess, the pandemic that kind of solidified me as like a regular Woodman shopper because they were open all night long and I didn't have to go at like, Sunday afternoon when everybody's shopping, that kind of thing. And, I wanted to limit exposure and all that stuff. And so we, often will hit the Woodmans up here in town late at night. I do know they have a new one down in Racine now too. And there's a lot of things I like about the organization, like the fact that they're employee owned and things like that. But a while back, and these have actually been around for a while, this device is a robot, right? This device, when it's not busy, so this is only late at night that you will typically see this running, or on a slow day, like a Wednesday afternoon or something, this device will go up and down the aisles, look at all the products on the shelf, scan the little tags on the edge of the shelf to get like, I don't know, the barcode or the product number or whatever, look at the stock level, and then feed it into their database so they can figure out what products they're out of or short on or need to order, right? Otherwise, how would you do this? Well, you'd have a human with a device, right, doing the same thing, or a human, even worse, with a piece of paper and pencil, and it's like more M&Ms, more chocolate bars, or whatever, And if you're partial to something, it's like, all right, order, 3 cases of peanut M&Ms because I really like those. I don't want to run out. So it could be biased as well. But if you ever go to a Woodman's, it's pretty fascinating. You'll see these things going up and down the aisles, doing exactly that. and they're equipped with like LiDAR or LiDAR and sensors and all that stuff. So if like, and I've tested this, I've stepped in front of it, but I'm just gonna like roll the video here. I'll mute the audio, but you can just watch it, like what it does. See how it shines the light on the shelf, right? And so, like, if it was a human doing this, they would stand there in one spot for each item. Think of how many items are on the shelf. This one's already got the first shelf done, like 40 items or something. And it's pretty amazing. Notice like down here in front, there's a little LiDAR thing that's sensing. And right there, it figured out, oh, the stupid human standing in front of me. And now I'm backing off. And notice how far I have to go before it decides it can move again. Now it's moving again. Right. And all right, so that's just one example. That's retail, folks, right? And this is something you can go and see in person, right? And they have a little parking spot for it at the place and everything. So fascinating that a company like that, um, you know, that I generally feel cares about their workers pretty much, has a robot on staff. Real interesting too, for those that maybe work at Amazon. Somebody Google for me, what is the percentage of employees at Amazon warehouses that are robots? Somebody Google that for me and then report back. All right. So in retail, right? Look at a lot of big companies. You got Walmart, Amazon, Kroger. Kroger, by the way, is the company that now owns Pick and Save, right? Really, really big company. All of them use AI technology in their sales, right? It says here that retail supports 52 million working Americans. And you know what? I ran a bunch of retail businesses and I worked in retail since I was about like 12 years old, right? No, it wasn't punishment. My parents weren't cruel, but they owned a business and they trained me pretty young, to run a register and deal with customers, and that's just kind of a thing. Okay, so Lynette, you're giving me a number, 1 million. I'm looking for the percentage. How many workers at Amazon warehouses are robotic? 75%. Five. Okay. I'm not sure what those numbers mean. 75% or 5%? 75%. That's what I thought. Here's a really striking statistic. No more than like 5, 6 years ago, that number was about 30%. So, what does that tell you about Amazon? Anybody that works in the warehouse there, I'm just telling you, they don't want you working there forever. Right? They want to get you in there, working a couple years, you earn some money while you go to school, or you're trying to get a real job, and then they want to get rid of you. Why? Because a robot's coming to take that job. Right. And I don't know if we have anybody here that does that. But 52 million working Americans is a quarter of the total workforce in the US works in retail sales or retail stores. Right. So that's not small. Retail is a really big sector still. Right. Estimated GDP from it is $4.56 trillion. That's annually, and that's from several years ago, probably like from like for 2022, I think is when that number is from. All right, problems with retail. Well, retail stores now have to compete with online stores, and we were strangely having this discussion just this. Oh gosh, it wasn't yesterday. It was the day before yesterday. We were hanging out with a friend. Went to a couple of retail stores to do some shopping, and then we're like, you know what? Let's go Southridge and just check it out. Haven't been there in a long time, right? So Southridge Mall on the southwest side of the Milwaukee area, and we walked in there, and the first thing that struck us is, wow, a lot of the big stores are gone. There's a whole lot of empty storefronts. Wow, this mall is filled with a whole bunch of stuff I don't think I would ever buy. Like really weird things like that. And then we're noticing kind of like the demographic makeup of the people shopping there, and it didn't seem to be people who were like super rich. It seemed to be more working class people. And then it started, you know, you know, basically jump in my head that people that have plenty of money they just hop up online, find it on Amazon or wherever, and just order it and have it delivered the next day, and they're good, right? They don't even have to get in their car, right? And where people that might not have that much money, they might not have a computer, or maybe they just need to get out of the house because their house is really small, or they're there mall walking for exercise, which is basically what we were doing. Um, but online is huge now. What happened during the pandemic is before the pandemic, there was still a big percentage of the population that either very rarely shopped online or never shopped online. And then the pandemic happened, and it's like, well, I guess I can order my groceries online and have them delivered. And then I don't know if any of you have done that. Are any of you like order your groceries and have them delivered, people? No? Yes? All right. What about order your groceries and go pick them up? Yeah. I mean, that is a thing. The one that always gets me is I have a neighbor here. We live in kind of like a college area, and we also live about 2 blocks away from McDonald's. And I swear every other day, that neighbor, 2 blocks away from McDonald's, mind you, right? Like total walking distance, like across a parking lot distance, orders McDonald's DoorDash from right down the street. I'm like, what? You can't put your shoes on, walk down the street? You know what I mean? But he's still buying the McDonald's, right? All right. So they do have a problem. So retail stores have this problem that how do we keep people still coming to the store? There is one aspect of it that keeps people coming is sometimes, a picture of a product really isn't as good as actually seeing it in person. And here's a silly example. Like you're going to buy a big screen TV. Sometimes you go to the store and you go, oh, this TV looks a whole lot better than this one, that kind of thing. Um, the other problem that retail stores have now is nobody wants to work at them, right? And I don't know how many of you are on that boat. It's like I don't, and I think sometimes to my children, right? It's like, oh, you can just go up to the store here and get a job. I don't want to do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with stocking shelves or running a register, because that's kind of where I started working. I was doing that kind of stuff. Um, and there is this thing that happened during COVID-19, and you guys might not be as in tune to it as people more in my age bracket, but I feel like society jumped forward 10 years in time because we were all forced to learn online, work online, communicate online. We weren't all ready for it, but now we are, right? And here I am. I'm teaching from home right now. I love it. I don't have to drive to campus. Otherwise, we would be like at the IMET Center and I'd be spending an hour in each direction. Then I'm hitting the vending machine in Starbucks and McDonald's and whatever, to like feed myself. And oh my God, all that's saved. Wear and tear on the car is saved. The fuel is saved. The highways are safer, etc. All right. So they have here a whole list of examples of what kind of stuff these organizations are doing um, using AI, right? So Lowe's, which is a home improvement store, has an autonomous robot. Now, it's kind of why I threw up that graphic, right? So there was an example of an autonomous robot. Uh, the Woodman's one is taking stock, right? Telling you what to order. The Lowbot is actually fetching the product. And that's kind of what happens in Amazon warehouses, right? If the products are put on the shelf the right way, the robot can grab it and probably do it more accurately, than one of you guys. Sorry, but it's like, I wanted the 32 megabytes of RAM, not 16. Read the label, that kind of thing. They talk about Amazon Go, a self checkout store, right? And that's kind of a trend that's happening. Chatbots to answer customer inquiries. Love hate relationship with those. I recently had a chatbot experience where my Adobe Creative Cloud subscription got overcharged. And so I got up on their website. There's no way you can call them anymore, by the way, or email them. You have to go through the chatbot. I'm like, hey, you guys overcharged me. I'm like, oh, we had new pro features. We thought you would love them. So we just upped your subscription fee like 3 times or whatever. And then so I had to like talk to the chatbot for a bit. And then eventually I'm like, listen, I want to go back to the way it was before. Can you please, can I talk to an agent or something? And all of a sudden a real person came on. At least I think it was a real person. I'm not even sure, honestly, but they promised me a refund and then an adjustment back to the old rate. We'll see, right? I'm still waiting for that refund, by the way. Here they talk about in-store heat maps. where they can figure out which products people pick up, which are returned, where the customer goes after leaving the shelf. And this is a really weird and creepy one. They do this with a variety of technologies. If you go into a retail store, and I'll use Walmart as an example, Target is a really good example, where they have apps for their store. And frankly, I don't do the Target one, but I do the Walmart one because I like the Walmart pay thing a lot. Just really saves a lot of time. Um, if you're running the app while you're in the store, you can do stuff like, hey, where are the Q-tips? Right. And it'll tell you how to get to the Q-tips because it knows what store you're in. And it'll tell you to turn left, go right, go forward. And it's in aisle 6 on the top shelf, third over from the right, like really goofy stuff like that. But they're also, because of the sensors in your phone, tracking your position in the store. So like they gather information about you as a customer. It's like, oh, Ty comes into the store and the first place he goes is to the clearance aisle. Right. Because if the thing I'm looking for is in the clearance aisle and I can save some money on it, why not? Right. That's just my philosophy. But they'll notice that I always go to electronics. I always go to the potato chip aisle or whatever your deal is. My wife always goes to the clearance clothing, right? Yeah, they always walk away from the candy because they're trying to cut back on their calories or whatever. And they, like, if you linger in an aisle and you're looking at a product and they have sensors in that aisle, you might even get marketing from them attributed to that. Isn't that weird? Right? Is that intrusive or is it helpful? You need to ask yourself that question. Um, right. And it's computer vision technologies for sure. All right. So we're not doing that task. Right. I can make it homework for you if you want, but I won't. Um, let's look at agriculture. Agriculture is really kind of one of the most interesting areas because one of the things I always talk about in AI classes is AI versus automation versus the progression of society. And one of my standard little quips is like back in the early 1800s, 95% of the US workforce, 95% worked on the farm, right? Because farming is labor intensive, taking care of animals, crops, tilling the fields, sowing the fields, harvesting, processing the foods, all that stuff. Hey man, you want to eat, you got to work on the farm. Sorry, unless you happen to have a little bit of money and can pay somebody else to do it, but that's the 5%. Then they came out with the mechanical plow, and then more importantly, the steam driven plow, and then machines like the cotton mill and things like that that automated that process. And now less than 5% of the population. Um, well, yeah, okay. So I guess they don't work on the farm, but people who work in agriculture, 10.9% in 2019, and I would anticipate this number has gone down a lot since then. It does contribute a lot to the economy, right? So you might not think about it that way, but we grow a lot of food here in the U.S. We produce a lot of meat. We have a lot of resources, and we often export a lot of it, which is pretty weird. The problems they have, right? Demand for sufficient, safe food, and then minimizing the waste of food, right? So, like, to grow enough food to feed people, to have it be of good enough quality, and to not have waste. Like, you don't want to grow like 100 acres of corn, but you only sell 50 and the other 50 just rot, and you throw it away. That's wasteful, right? It's not really smart. Agriculture takes up a lot of land. It occupies 40% of the Earth's, surface that isn't underwater, right? 70% of global water use goes to agriculture. 11% of greenhouse gases come from agricultural production. So it produces a lot of waste, right? Climate change, soil erosion, et cetera, make it harder to plant crops. We're pretty lucky here in the United States because we've only been kind of taxing the soil here for a couple hundred years. And there's a lot of countries, like, why do you look at like the northern part of Africa or the Middle East and it's all desert? Well, humans have lived there for tens of thousands of years, if not longer, and they've completely destroyed the environment in the process, and that another thing is who wants to go be a farmer these days? There are those really rare few that do that, by the way. All right. Some of the things that they do in agriculture is they analyze market demand to kind of figure out which crops to actually plant, right? So some farmers prioritize profits right? Hey, we're going to grow. I don't know what a really profitable plant is. We're going to grow asparagus or mushrooms because that makes a lot more money. Or maybe they're going to grow weed these days, right? That's a cash crop. I've heard that up in like the UP in Michigan. Like every farmer up there is trying to grow weed now because it's a cash crop, and they so many are growing them that the weed is really cheap up there. Whatever, you know. Um, Also, kind of keeping track of the soil health, right? So like we can look at the soil, analyze it, and go, okay, we've been farming this for 5 years in a row. Maybe we need to give it a break for a few years so it can recover and gain back some of the nutrients. They have automatic things that they can do, like feeding the crops, so the farmers don't have to be out there doing it. And then we can use AI to monitor nutrition, diseases, water stress, and all those kind of things. Right. Goofy little graphic there. Some of the solutions in the industry is smart irrigation. So it always drove me crazy. Like you're driving down the road in the summer and it's like 100 degrees out, and people have their sprinklers on, right? Okay, now I don't know if that's like a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, but it always seemed to me like a bad thing to do. Like, why not water at night? You know, when the stuff's not going to evaporate instantly, that kind of thing. A lot of farms now, big commercial farms, are using things like drones, GIS, which is graphical information systems. It's kind of like what drives, um, your GPS technology. Um, and they have drones that fly around the farm and look at the crops so that they don't have to go out there and look at the crops. They can just watch the drone and watch the cameras of the drone and go, oh, look over there, like towards, that field. It doesn't look good. Something's going on. Right. And then they can go out. So not spend the whole day walking through the field doing it. Um, they have technologies now and robots that can go through a farm field and pull the weeds. Wow. So I don't have to hire somebody to do it. And it probably does a better job, but I'm sure the robot costs a fortune on top of it all. Right. And when you start thinking about it with farms, like what other stuff do happens, right? One thing that I know is really big now in farming is mechanical or robotic planting, tilling, and harvesting, where they have these big harvesters and they put autopilots on them and they just put them out in the field. They're GPS driven and they just like so the farmer doesn't have to sit there in the cold or the hot weather or any of that stuff. They just program the machine and the machine does the work. All right. Let's take a little bit of a look at healthcare. They have a lot of issues too, right? Right. So as a background here, we know what healthcare does, right? It includes everything from like hospitals and doctors' office and clinics and all sorts of areas. Notice they include insurance companies and pharmaceuticals in there as well. And they talk about some big organizations here, United Health and Johnson and Johnson, et cetera. It's more than 900,000 businesses with over 20 million employees work in this sector, and 3.8 trillion impact on the economy 7 years ago. Huge, right? And you can only imagine that's probably doubled or tripled since that time. Heck, every time you turn your head, there's like a new hospital or clinic being built, right? Um, some of the problems they have in that industry, right, is the type of costs that are related to healthcare, especially if you don't have insurance, are pretty exorbitant. And it keeps a lot of people away from the doctors, but they want people to come in to do things. The way the experience is going to those clinics, it's like the last place I want to walk into ever is like a hospital or a clinic or a doctor's office, real frankly. I know that as I get older, that's going to happen more, obviously, right? But you try to minimize that. They also have this issue where a lot of people are turning to alternatives, including holistic healthcare, where they try to take care of their own needs outside those systems. Accessibility. They have the same problem in the healthcare industry that they have in retail, right? They can't find enough people, right? If you don't think IT is an area for you, well, healthcare is hiring. I'm just letting you know. And actually, a really good field is healthcare IT or information systems is a really popular area. A lot of people are concerned about safety working in healthcare. I mean, obviously, the thing about the pandemic, like people are dying and you have to go into work, right? Not where you really want to be. Um, Violence in healthcare, yeah, people get burnt out, they get stressed, they work too much in healthcare, so there's not a good work-life balance, and I think that is a pretty important thing. So they have a lot of issues there. What if you were going in for surgery, and as part of your surgery was done by a robot? I'm not sure how I would feel about that. But if I saw my doctor and the doctor's got like shaky hands and a drinking problem or something like that, I might opt for the robot because the robot's probably less likely to mess up, right? Um, they're also using AI to do really weird things. And I was kind of exposed to a little bit of this technology, not this skin cancer thing, but AI is really good. For example, if they can look at pictures of people's skin and determine if that little freckle might be skin cancer sooner than a doctor can do it, right? By looking at a bunch of factors. So, hey, why not? Um, they have this thing about like health monitoring now. I don't know if a lot of you wear smartwatches. Oh, I don't even have mine on today. But if you have a smartwatch, right, an Apple Watch, whatever, Fitbit, whatnot, a lot of those can monitor your health statistics, report back to your device, and in some cases, if doctor sanctioned, can send that data right to your doctor. Like, oh, Ty's having a heart attack. Let's call the ambulance for him, right? I even have a couple of friends because I'm older that have devices like pacemakers and things in their chest that Bluetooth to their phone and do exactly that. So if they're having a heart attack, it for real calls 911, you know, not messing around, you know. Um, I think that one, okay, interesting story that happened to me is um, I had, I don't know, this is like a routine check. My doctor didn't like my EKG, so he sent me for a complete heart evaluation, and they put me on this machine. And the machine, part of what the machine did is it had some software inside of it with AI in it that would anticipate what things might be a problem in the future, right? And I thought that was really, really weird. I mean, I'm in okay health. I'm not at risk or anything right now, but they did indicate to me that I might want to like adjust my diet a little bit in a couple of ways to prevent certain problems coming up. There's a little video here if you guys want to watch that. I am going to skip it. All right. Um, some solutions that they're putting on there. What about AI powered prosthetic arm for amputees? I'd rather have it be powered by my brain, or controlled by my brain, but hey, maybe if somebody insults you and it like, flips them off, maybe that's okay, right? Like the arm's got like an AI algorithm for that. Um, there's a bunch of health chatbots out there now that that you can interact with. The one that they're talking about, Sensely, is an empathy driven one. So are you feeling okay today? I'm sorry to hear that, where your doctor might not have as good a bedside manner. But there's a lot also where a lot of people won't like open up to their doctor for whatever reason, and they'll open up to a chat bot and ask questions, and very weird, but it is a thing. Um, they have autonomous robots that disinfect rooms, right? Like when they're afraid of spreading a disease, or this other one here, Lucas 3, which does CPR, right? And it can do it in these really small spaces, which is kind of interesting. All right, once again, there's a couple little graphics here showing some of these devices, right? And this is a big UV projector that sanitizes the whole room. Pretty interesting, right? All right. There's, and I'm not going to make you guys do this, but here's an example of an app that's out there. This is not the only one, right? This was around when they did this. There is a link down here, so it's wysa.io. And this is an app, and you can talk to it, right? And I want you to notice this is focusing on mental health. And you know what? There's kind of a mental health crisis in this country these days, partially because of the pandemic. I think partially because of the way the world is, but you know, um, A lot of people are suffering, and a lot of people don't have the money to go to a doctor or to interact with a therapist. And this is kind of an interesting workaround. So it's out there, folks. And I do hear stories all the time about people using Chat GPT as their therapist, which isn't really designed for that. So I would caution you a little bit on that. All right, skipping over the discussion thing. All right, let's look at manufacturing now. And manufacturing is an area where there's been kind of a lot of impact. All right, background. All right, so manufacturing is just like building things from scratch, basically, right? We use machines, we use people, we use materials, and we build things. And where we live in this part of the world, Southeast Wisconsin, there is a lot of manufacturing in this area. Not as much as there used to be. Like we used to have all the big auto manufacturers here. Most of those are gone, but we still have a lot of things that are built right here, like right in Racine, Kenosha County, Milwaukee, lots of factories building things. Um, and they have examples of things you can build. It can be just about anything. Manufacturing is about 11.5% of the total output of the United States. 8.5% of the workforce is employed in this industry. And I would bet if you looked at those numbers for Wisconsin, it would be higher, right? Um, Industry and manufacturing here has a long tradition in this area. And one story I like to tell is how when my mom arrived here in 1954, not knowing a word of English, the day after she arrived, she had a full-time job, working 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and supported the whole family with that job, right? In manufacturing. Pretty interesting. And she stayed with that job for a long time, believe it or not, and got enough money together to raise us silly kids, by the way. Right. All right. So they have a problem in manufacturing too, as a lot of sectors. I hope you're noticing a correlation here. They can't find enough people, and it's not a matter of just finding people, but finding people with skills, like to do specific tasks. So there is a shortage of skilled labor. So if you have a skill, right, mechanical skill, design skills, um, you know, welding, electronics, whatever, right? People will hire you. Oh my God, right? They will hire you. Um, they have a problem, right? When you're manufacturing, like how much of something do we make, right? They don't know how to predict it accurately. Like some years they have big sales, other years they don't have sales, and you don't want to make too much stuff and have it sit there, and you don't want to make too little stuff because then you have nothing to sell, right? Um, and that trickles down then into inventory. So it's a problem that manufacturers have, So like, um, I have a friend who just recently retired from Harley Davidson. He worked on the manufacturing line building the motors, and he was one of the last people to touch every motor that would come off the line. Like he was, making sure it was all good. And he's been feeding me stories. He goes, and 5 years ago, we used to make I don't know. I'm throwing numbers out there. I don't remember the numbers exactly. Like we used to make 600 motors a week, and then last year we were down to 500 motors a week, and now they're cutting it down to 400 motors a week, and now they're moving us to 4-day weeks. You know what I mean? Because why? Because people aren't buying the cycles, right? It's a different demographic, or they're really expensive, so people keep them running longer and they don't buy new ones. So parts are more the things they want, and they don't want any brand new motor, you know. They always look at increasing efficiency at manufacturing, and the U.S. has a big history of this too, right? Like the uh, production line, the assembly line kind of thing was developed here in the United States. So a lot of the big mechanization things happened here. One of the problems that we have clearly is competitions from around the world, right? And this is one of the reasons why our president wants to slap tariffs on everybody, like make the goods from overseas cost more so that people will buy the stuff that's made here. And hopefully, it is a very complicated formula though. But that happened, a really great example was the steel industry. There was a time where the US basically made all the steel for the planet pretty much, right? And then they started doing it over in the Orient, and they were able to do it much cheaper. Some people argue it's not as good steel, but I don't care. I can still build a car or a building out of it. So I'm good. So if it's cheaper, I can order it somewhere else and have it shipped across the planet and it's still cheaper than buying it here. Guess what happens to the factories here? They start disappearing, right? And that happened a lot, especially, in northeastern part of the U.S. Basically anywhere from like where we are up through the East Coast. Big on manufacturing, and a lot of that stuff evaporated. A lot of communities have rebounded. Racine had a real rough time of it. Kenosha had a rough time of it. But you think you guys had it bad, man? Go to Detroit someday. They still have entire swaths of the city that are completely barren of houses, buildings, people. It is crazy, even to this day, right? How much was there and how much is gone. So some of the things that they're doing in industry, um, they do have a lot of robotic vehicles, right? And they have a lot of robots to build the actual products. One thing I think that's really interesting is Gateway at our engineering center in Sturtevant, which is on Highway H, just south of 20, right underneath the Sturtevant Water Tower. And someday stop there. It's a Gateway campus. They have a whole room. I don't know how many square feet it is, where they have, I don't know, 50 industrial robots and CNC machines and all this like crazy technology. They even have a little robot host that walks the hall, and you can stop it. Its name is Temmie, right? And you can have a conversation with it and say, "Hey, Temmie, where's the bathroom?" Or Temmie, how do I sign up for classes? Or Temmie, can you can you Google like the top 10 sci-fi movies or whatever, and it'll do all that stuff, right? It's got like chat GPT built in, but it's a robot that cruises around campus. So instead of having like an ambassador wandering the halls, they just have a robot wandering the halls. It's really kind of a trip. They also have a robot dog there, which is kind of amusing. That last bullet is kind of an interesting one, because I had one of my students, I think it was like last semester, maybe the semester before, summer semester, that works for a manufacturer here in Racine. If I'm not mistaken, they work. I'm trying to remember the company, Incinerator. Right? They work for that company, and part of their production line at Incinerator, they have these computer vision systems, basically these cameras that look at the parts that come off the production line, and just by looking at it with cameras can determine whether a part is good or bad or not, and then they don't have to have a person doing it. Um, and then they described basically that system went down, and then they realized they didn't have anybody in the organization that could do the same checking because they were never trained. Right. So while that system was down, I don't know what they were manufacturing that had to stop, but they had to shut down the whole production line as a result. Um, they have a lot of different things though that they have been doing. Um, like so they talk about the PPE equipment, right? Um, all right, this is really not an issue anymore. Like most of us are not walking around with masks, but there was a time where we were like, if we were on campus, we had to have masks on. We had shields and disinfectants and whatever. Um, and I still see some people wearing them, which is good, right? If you're sick, you probably should wear them, or better yet, just don't go out there. But they do have uh, computer vision systems that monitor those things. I think the one thing that was really interesting is I read an article about Wegmans, which is a big Northeast US grocery store chain like Kroger's or Pick and Save or whatever, that they've just recently put AI facial recognition software in their stores, and they're recognizing their customers by face. And once again, if you have the app on the phone, they can direct you to where the sales are in the store. It's like really some trippy stuff. Or how about this as a thought? Because I know there's some restaurants doing it already. They use AI facial recognition. So when food's brought to the table and somebody goes, makes a horrible face, they're like, you better go check on table 5. They're not happy with their pizza, that kind of thing, rather than waiting 20 minutes for the waiter to come back or the waitress to come back. Very interesting. A lot of these things, visual inspection of products, if we talked about that, and then automating inventory using drones, robots, having the robots do things that would be unsafe for humans to do. Yeah, so they're using a lot of that stuff in industry. At our IT advisory board meeting, and I'm going to encourage you guys all to go to that later this semester. We had one of our advisors who works at a manufacturing company give us feedback that was really kind of interesting. That they have a manufacturing company that I forget what they build, but they have a problem where they couldn't get enough workers, so they started putting robots on the production line. And then once they put the robots in the production line, it's like, well, this is better. They work 24/7. They never call in sick, you know, etc. And so robots are taking people's jobs already, right? And those aren't even AI driven robots. They're just ones that are programmed. But still, the writing's on the wall, folks. Changes are coming, right? All right. I'm trying to be strategic about this. We're about halfway through the slideshow. Let's talk about this topic and then we'll take our break, right? So we go a little more than halfway before we take the break. So now we're going to look at the energy industry. All right. So energy industry, oil, natural gas, electricity, power plants, all that kind of stuff. So that includes fossil fuels and solar panels and hydropower, nuclear power, renewable energy, all of that. There's a lot of Americans that work in the energy sector, 6.7 million, so about 4.5% of the total workforce. I don't know how accurate that is. We do know that the demand for energy is increasing, that a lot of the old nuclear power plants are now being retired and not being replaced, by the way. And then we have these things called data centers they're building, which are super power hungry. And then when you wonder, if you guys ever wonder why, for example, did Microsoft decide to build these humongous data centers here in Wisconsin? And here's the answer. The land is cheap. It's flat and stable. There's no earthquakes, wildfires, landslides. They're very, very rare. We have access to lots and lots of fresh water, which helps to cool down the data center. And we have ample access to power. We have a lot of power plants in this area because we already have a really huge electrical grid here. And so some of the cheapest electric rates in the country. But as more demand comes from the data centers, our price of electricity will go up, folks, right? So be mindful of that. All right. So problems in energy. All right, oil is an issue. We do produce a lot of oil here in the United States, and I think a lot of people think we import it all from the Middle East. That's not really the case, right? We have a huge production here in the United States, and some of the ways we're producing it maybe aren't the greatest, but we do have a lot of oil that we can pull from, right? We also have a lot of natural gas, and the one thing that we have a ton of is coal, right? So there's no shortage of those things here. So we'll be okay. It's kind of the way I put it to people. So more demand for electricity. We talked about that, but also all the fossil fuels have emissions, and emissions ruin the climate, right? And you can kind of go into an argument about that if you wish, but it is true that we pollute, right? A lot of the newer power plants are a lot cleaner than the old ones. Like we have a power plant in Oak Creek, and in the old days, man, the clouds that would come out of that thing, you didn't want to be downwind of them. Now they have these big scrubbers on it. But back in the day, man, those clouds were yellow and had a lot of sulfur in them and would drop a lot of acid rain in places like Pennsylvania, like that far away, and that's gotten better. But, we have ample amount of coal. We have tons and tons of coal. Yeah, I mean, energy security, I mean, we don't know, right? I want you to think about this. If the power goes out, how long can you survive? I mean, this is really kind of a deep question. And for a lot of people, it's not very long. Think about this. The power goes out, the water stops pumping. Can't drink water or flush the toilets. Power goes out, the heat's not running. Can't see things. Well, for a while, I can juice up my phone. Maybe I can even run my car or something to charge my phone. But after a while, that goes down too, and the cell towers go down. And then, oh wait, all our money's electronic now. We lose access to our money too, so I can't go to the store and buy anything, and I can't get cash because the bank can't verify how much money I have. Oh my god, yeah, it would be like The Walking Dead in like a couple of weeks, pretty much, right? Kind of scary stuff to think of. And when you do lose power, you very quickly, And I don't know if anybody's lost power like in the winter ever and been down for a few days. It is really reminds you quickly how much you need it. All right. So they are starting to use AI to monitor our electrical grid and run some of the systems. And that's kind of good and kind of bad. Um, but they have AI models, and DeepMind is an AI model that predicts how strong the wind power output will be. So in other words, it's like, hey, on Wednesday, we're going to have 40-mile-an-hour winds. And actually, when you learn about wind power, it's like when it gets too windy, they shut them down because they can't handle going that fast. Um, but they can use algorithms to figure out when they can generate the power and then store it. Um, and the same happens with solar energy and a lot of other different renewables, right? And they're using AI to make some of those predictions. All right. We're going to come back after a break and we're going to talk about transportation, but I'm going to pause the recording for now and I'll see you guys in about 5 minutes. That would be at 9 o'clock sharp. All right, back from break and moving on in the slideshow here. Now we're going to start talking about the transportation sector. Right. And so this is the sector that, moves us around, right? So like airplanes, rail, trucks, cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's 5.6 million people working in transportation and warehousing. Transportation accounts for, you know, basically a little over a trillion in 2016. I can only imagine that's really grown a lot. That's really kind of an old number that they're using here. Regardless, it is a large amount of impact on the economy. When COVID happened, right, a lot of people died, right? And I think people are starting to lose sight of that, but it was a thing, and it had us all locked down. A lot of us had to deal with it, and chances are that at least a few of us here in the session lost people or knew somebody that lost people during that. Um, so this leads to once again staffing shortage. You guys picking up on like a theme here, right? Like people, like all the industries are short of people, right? So when you're like, I can't find a job, right? When you get into that mindset, I'm like, no, you just have to get the skills to get the job. The jobs are out there. You just have to apply for them, and more importantly, be skilled, right? So the jobs are out there. So if they're short on people in transportation, what happens? Goods and services and people don't travel, right? They don't get delivered. People don't make it to the places where they want to go. And, you know, the costs of moving things around, the fuel costs and all that is a problem. Also, congestion. And, like one of the big pet peeves I have here, right? And you can completely disagree with me, is all over the place they're putting in bike lanes, and generally I'm okay with that. We ride our bikes a lot, and bike lanes are nice when you're going somewhere on a bike. But I see a lot of our major roadways here in Milwaukee now, they've taken away parking, put in bike lanes, and it's like, well, now I can't pass anybody, or God forbid an ambulance needs to go through, that kind of thing. So a lot of people are avoiding. They don't want to drive, and real frankly, younger generations. I look at my own children. It's like, do I really need to have a car? It seems like it costs a lot of money, and you have to be responsible and buy insurance and and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but it also enables economic opportunities. What I tell people, because if you can drive somewhere, then you might be able to get a job that otherwise you wouldn't get. But I can get a job online. Okay, true. But you might want to go get groceries. I'll have them delivered. And when I go to McDonald's, I'll DoorDash it. Like there's always an argument against it. So yeah, true. But I still feel pretty strongly about the fact that being able to drive gives you economic opportunity. It also gives you the ability to escape if necessary, drive somewhere else. You know, I'm packing up and I'm going to California. If you want to have a little joke about it. They do have a lot of things that have been happening. So okay, and I think I've mentioned this already. Like Tesla's got self-driving vehicles. There's a lot of companies now that do, and it really does work pretty well. And there are several states in the United States that do allow for autonomous vehicles. California, Arizona, Florida, I forget all the states, but I know those states for sure do it. Um, we do use AI systems to predict traffic jams. Here's just a really kind of interesting thing. Like, how many times do you guys use your GPS to go somewhere? A lot of people use it every time they go somewhere, right? I don't always do that, but I think we've talked about this too, where it's like, hey, I'm plotting a route to the store, not because I don't know how to get to the store, but because the GPS software, whatever I'm using, Google Maps or Waze or whatever, might go, hey, there's a cop ahead. Oh, there's a accident up ahead. Reroute and go this way instead. That kind of thing. Um, yeah, that's the thing that's happening. Flying drone taxis. I don't know if that's fully come into fruition yet. They told us a long time ago we'd be flying around like the Jetsons. Didn't really seem to happen quite yet. I mean, people can barely drive down the street. You want them like, you know, flying through the air. I'm not so sure. Okay, they use Google Maps and Waze, like I talked about. Right. They have software that detects if a driver is falling asleep, right? And then wake up the driver, right? And yeah, that sounds pretty scary. Um, they have a lot of like these electric bikes and scooters and things like that too, that you know can help you out basically. And then they also have automated delivery robots and stuff, which is pretty interesting. Um, all right, let's talk about education now. And guess what? That's the field I work in. Um, there are tons of schools in the U.S. Right, we have more schools than probably most places on the planet. It says 3.7 million teachers in both private and public school classrooms, and I don't know if they're counting all levels of education there, but I guess I'm one of them, right? So 3.7 plus one, whatever. That's me. Um, the average student to teacher ratio in public schools is 16 students to one instructor. And how many people do we have here tonight? Pretty close, right? At least in the Zoom session. I know there's more people signed up for this than are here, but hey, that's on them, right? Um, right. Problems facing the industry. Schools are overcrowded. Not so much anymore. Pandemic happened, right? A lot of people stopped taking school in person. Right? School spending is stagnant. Totally true. People who do what I do haven't received a raise for years and years. We get cost of living, but we don't get any raises, and they make us teach more students and whatever. How teachers are trained is outdated. I do agree with that, right? The way I was taught to be a teacher is way different than how they teach teachers now. Um, lack of teacher education and innovation. Well, I would argue that a little bit. Innovation, perhaps. A lot of people freak out going to schools now. It's like somebody's going to come in with a gun and shoot up the whole school, right? I mean, it seems like every other week we got like a school shooting story, and now it's happening overseas too, and we're hearing about it. Really, really weird. I don't know what the world has come to. Kind of scary. There's a lot out there. Help for students with disabilities. One thing that we have noticed here at Gateway is that we have a lot more students that have uh, physical, mental, cognitive disabilities, much more than we've seen in the past. And I'm not sure what is driving that. Maybe people are just being more open about it, uh, and we have to contend with that, right? And dealing with people that have disabilities is more challenging than dealing with people that don't, right? Um, there are a lot of problems with the things that are being taught. Some of the things are not evolving fast enough. One of the reasons I like being in IT is IT does evolve, and the way we teach evolves faster than any of the other areas. And let's face it, everybody's a little crazy now, right? A lot of mental health challenges. Um, People started feeling very isolated during the pandemic, didn't know how to deal with it, still don't know how to deal with it, and we're wrestling with all of that. So some schools are using a bunch of different technologies. They have a technology at George Washington University where they have a chat bot. You know what? A lot of schools are starting to put them in place now. So you go to their website or whatever, you log in, you can talk to an AI agent. Very interestingly, if you ever hit the Gateway homepage and the little chat bot thing comes up, We have real people sitting behind that, by the way. It's not a chatbot. Thought you should know. Um, they have teaching assistants at GIT that help. So for example, this isn't a traditional university environment, but if you guys ever do go to a regular university, you'll have a professor who will lecture you a couple times a week, and then you usually have a TA, a teaching assistant, that maybe helps you with homework and questions and stuff, and it does all the grading. So the professor just talks, and then the teaching assistants do all the work, basically. But now they have virtual ones, right? And that's kind of interesting. Then they have this Alex thing. This thing has been around for actual while, and this is out there for people to use. I think we used to use it. I'm not sure if we still do. If anybody knows, let me know. But it's kind of an interesting tool. All right, I think this is the last industry, the banking industry. So banking, runs all of our financial systems here, whether you're working with a credit union, a bank, a finance company, or whatever. Um, Often the banks focus on certain sectors. So you have, banks that focus on commercial interests and banks that focus on personal accounts and things like that. And then there's investment bankers and finance companies. A lot of people work in banking. Historically, it's been a really good career area. They usually pay really well, and there's usually plenty of work. Um, but they have their issues too, right? Um, a lot of people are having competition now, right? So um, if you drive around and you go, oh, another bank popped up. Oh, look, there's a new credit union. Oh, wow, right? That's been going on a lot, and a lot of foreign banks are kind of moving in now, which we really didn't see a lot of in the past. It's always an issue for banks to comply with regulations, right? Like there's certain things that they can and cannot do. So that's kind of a issue for them. Consumers expect more from their financial institutions, and the one thing that I suggest very strongly to everybody, right, is don't bank with a bank, bank with a credit union, right? Credit unions are a much better deal. Usually, you get much better levels of service and flexibility from credit unions. They also have problems keeping customers, right? Most of us now will change bank accounts every X number of years because we get a better deal somewhere else, right? And my wife and I and our family have done that a little bit, but I also have the same bank account I first opened when I was a kid. It's still an active bank account. I opened it at a credit union. The credit union got bought out 3 or 4 times, but it's still the same account number, still the same account, and it still exists. Pretty interesting. Also, banks are getting hacked a lot and attacked a lot, so that's a really big issue. Security breaches are like fall into all sorts of areas, both like their servers getting hacked or people like getting your account number and your debit or credit card number and buying things, that type of thing. A lot of banking companies have got a lot of different things going on. One thing that I think is really interesting, and that's not mentioned here, but like, so I use that Educators Credit Union, and there's a branch right near my house, and I can walk in, but they no longer have tellers. They have these little video kiosks, and if I go through the drive-through, they got the same thing. And then if you go during the business hours and you hit one of those kiosks, you talk to a person. But if I go through the drive-through at night, I can still do all my banking. I can make a deposit, I can pull money, I can transfer funds, and all that stuff. And that's not even AI driven, right? But think of the power that gives you. Um, they have chatbots that help their users, right? Automate so they don't have to put a person on the phone. I will tell you that I'm still a fan of like being able to talk to somebody, especially when you have money problems. It's like, hey, my account's locked. What's going on? That kind of thing. You can talk to a person. Um, they also have software that allows banks to determine more quickly, like if somebody's applying for a loan, whether that loan is a good risk or not, as opposed to the past where they might make a judgment call based on the way you look, not on your financials or how reliable you are, but I don't like look at that guy, deny, that kind of thing. They also have ways to kind of look at people that have very little credit information and history, and they have AI related to that. Now, some of those things I think are kind of okay, but I worry a lot about some of these things. Like if AI is making a decision whether you're a good credit risk, I'm not super okay with that, you know. And I want you guys to think in those regards. Like when is it like we cross the ethical line? All right, so we'll skip those questions there. All right, so let's move on now, and we're going to look at how they can leverage things to further enhance capabilities and outcomes. We've kind of been doing that actually. So generative AI is around, right? And there's free versions and there's paid versions. Um, but I can tell you, I see the impact here at Gateway already. People in the offices, people in the faculty, all sorts of people are using it in a lot of different ways, right? One thing I do is when I generate the lecture notes for this class, I don't type up that document, by the way. I convert the PowerPoint to a PDF. I feed it into Google Notebook LM, and it creates that document. I tweak some of the wording, and I roll with it. Right? I make sure it's good, but man, if I had to type that up, I mean, that's a couple hours every week. I got to type up, you know, and think about it and edit. And if I can do that in 10, 15 minutes, that's a couple hours back in my day. Bonus, right? So that's one of the things. So now they're going to start looking at all these different industries, right? Um, so we're going to do these pretty quickly because I don't want to spend all night on these. But in retail, product recommendations based upon their knowledge of you, right? This guy always goes to electronics. Let's recommend, this product to them, or that type of things. Virtual try-ons, and I think this is kind of an interesting thing. There are websites already, and there are. I'm trying to think of like Nike. I think is a good example where you can go there and you can look at shoes and what they not only look like, but you can custom design them in some cases. And then there are also websites that allow you to upload images of yourself, and then you can see what the clothes that they're selling you would look like on you. Right. And that sounds like science fiction, but you know what, folks? Not really. Right. That's kind of a practical thing. So you don't have to go into the store and try it on. Um, Customized advertisement, increase engagement and conversion rates, perhaps, but I do find them annoying. And one thing, with classic example is you're doing a Google search on, I don't know, a textbook, and then you go to a website to read an article, and then they throw up a ad that relates to the topic of the textbook you were just Googling, right? Not accidental. My wife just yesterday was saying that I was thinking about Martha Stewart, and I didn't even Google it or anything. And then I hit this webpage, and there's this thing about Martha Stewart on it. Now, is that just a coincidence? Or has the singularity been reading my wife's mind? I'll ask you those questions. Kind of an interesting thought. Agriculture tries to optimize crop yields, right? Increase productivity, manage pests, also use less pesticides. There's some really good videos out there about how there's AI driven pesticide application robots that instead of just spraying everything, they only spray the plants that have problems. How logical is that, right? Totally, right? Less chemicals, better for everybody. Cheaper for the farmers too. Precision farming techniques help with resource allocation, absolutely. All right, a lot of medical image analysis aids, like that's kind of like the heart thing that I did, where they were indicating potential areas of problems and what I can do just based on the imaging, and that wasn't done by a human, right? And truly the human's not allowed to tell me that, but the software tells the doctor, and then the doctor looks at it and goes, yeah, I kind of agree with that. You should cut back on your sodium, or less fat, or whatever. So they have simulations for surgery so that people don't have to practice on real people, right? That kind of makes sense, right? And this is kind of like uh, driving a virtual car as opposed to driving a real one, because if you mess up the virtual car and you smash up, you're not going to die, right? Grand Theft Auto, pretty much, right? Yeah, just kidding. Personalized treatment plans, optimized patient care, and you know, if you're assuming that your doctor remembers everything about you and your history when they recommend a treatment plan, they might not, and they might give you medicines that aren't really good for you or treatments that aren't really good. Where an AI, if they have access to your data, can go, hey, wait a second, you can't give them that. They're allergic to penicillin. Just primitive examples, but there you go. Um, all right. So in manufacturing, Gen AI is helping to design more optimal products and come up with different types of solutions that humans aren't thinking about. And anywhere people can gain efficiencies, they go for it. Quality control increases, product excellence. Look at that manufacturing example I gave you earlier, where the thing that was doing the quality control on the production line failed, and then they didn't have any people trained to do the same job. Yeah, totally a problem. Um, and then predictive maintenance techniques. So this is one real big area in AI where AI can take a data set that comes off of an industrial robot and go, you know what? Hey, the widget number 5 is reading really high on the temperature chart. Every time we've seen that in the past, within a month, that part fails. So maybe they can go in there and fix the part before it fails so it doesn't shut down the production line. You see, like, some of the efficiencies that you can get there. Um, all right, demand forecasting is a big one in the energy industry, just like knowing, like, all right, hey, it's going to get cold out, so people are going to use more natural gas and more electricity, right? Or it's going to be super hot out, so people are going to run their AC, so they can do that kind of stuff. But they can like figure it out way in advance with long range forecasts and better data. Um, Energy efficient building design. So, like, if you look at any of our gateway facilities, especially the more modern ones, they do have systems in place. So, like, when we're not there on the weekends, they turn off the power and turn the heat way down. When I came back to campus this semester on the first day, the sensors in the classroom I was teaching weren't triggering heat. So I came into the classroom. I was like, man, this is like a refrigerator in here. And I had to call the guy, and the guy told me that, oh, there was a sensor failure. I restarted it. Okay, now we're good. Now you should get heat in about an hour, you know. But it's all automated. Like, there's not a person like walking around tweaking the thermostat. We have a sensor in the room, sends data to the master system. The master system turns on the HVAC, whatever it needs to do in that room in particular. And they can do it on a room by room basis. So if, like, room number 5 never gets used, we don't need to heat that one, right? Saves a lot of power for sure. We also have, smart grid things that are going on now. In other words, we have technology in place that looks at our whole electrical grid and can see, like, where we have sags in power and demands. And really, we are very, very fortunate in this part of the world because we don't lose power a lot. Have any of you guys ever lived anywhere else where it's really routine to lose power? And one place that I've been to, like, I've been to New York City a number of times, um, and people who live in New York City in the summertime, we're kind of accustomed to occasional blackouts because everybody's running their AC. And I'm like, this is normal? Well, yeah, it happens every once in a while, whatever. It's New York. I'm like, I couldn't live with that, And think here, it's like it really very rarely ever happens for sure. Um, in transportation, we do have a whole sensor grid. We talked about that does real time analysis of all the traffic patterns. And then when all the people are tapping in with their GPSs, they can help to reroute the traffic and alleviate some of those problems. I think it's just fascinating that we have that technology. Many of our traffic lights are already sensor based and AI based. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. There's a lot that aren't, but usually if you hit like a major roadway, and I'll just use one for example that might resonate with you guys. So let's say, like, Highway 50 and 31, or Highway 20 and 31, like real big intersections in Racine and Kenosha. Look at all the gadgets they have attached to the traffic lights there. Highly sensor driven. And some of it's very, very automated, some of it just works on timers. But if you ever drive through there at night and you're like the only car that pulls up to the light and there's no other cars coming from the other direction, light change color right away. How does that happen? They have sensors in the ground, they have cameras, it senses. It's like, all right, I can see there's no traffic coming. There's no other people around. All right, you can go. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. And that's all around us, uh, by the way, right? The autonomous vehicles are getting better. What was the prediction that we saw last week? That by 2035, most people won't be driving, right? And hope and probably will be driving electric cars. I'll tell you what, I'm going to hold on to my gas vehicles and I want to drive as long as I possibly can. Because I come from the generation where being able to get in a car and go somewhere equates to freedom, basically freedom from your parents, freedom from your employer, freedom from the government, freedom from whatever. You can get in the car and go. So I just had to think about that. In education, and this is kind of an interesting thought. How about adaptive learning experiences that cater to your own individual needs, right? Like as an instructor, that's one of my challenges. I have people that come into my classes, right? And think of like data analytics, right? Where I know some people know Excel pretty well already, right? It's clear in how they do their work. And then I have other people that I can tell have never touched it. And there's no right or wrong to that. But when I teach, I'm always having to teach to the lowest common learning level, not because you guys are dumb, because I have people to get up to speed. And once those people get up to speed, then it starts to even out as we move forward into more challenging topics. But what if, and I'm just throwing it out there, you went to school and they're like, oh, you already know all that stuff? All right, let's just move on. Let's go to the stuff you don't know, right? And, in many ways, that's maybe better. We do have systems like this in place already. I'm not sure I'm a super huge fan, virtual tutors, but hey, you know what? We also have like YouTube, right? We also have like all the, Chat GPT and Gemini and Copilot. And you just go, hey, how do I blank? And it'll tell you, right? So that's and it's not exactly like a tutor, but kind of, right? Um, and then we also have a lot of simulations that happen, and this is a kind of a word we use a lot here at Gateway, interactive learning environments. And right now we're in one. I know a lot of you are cameras off and you're just listening. I think, I'm not really even sure. I mean, I know Teofilo, Christine, and Armando, I think, are paying attention, although Armando's playing Battlefield on screen number 2 or something. I'm teasing. But seriously, right? The fact that we don't have to leave the house, we can do our work. And then when we get to the point, like in these AI classes where we're coding AI stuff, and we start looking at each other's code and helping each other out and doing all that kind of stuff, we can do it online and interact in ways that we never really could before. AI is enabling some of that, and some of that is manual, granted, but one example is I have an AI companion right here in this Zoom session. I do not have it running tonight, right? But I'm going to turn it on for a second, and I think you guys get a message on your screen saying, hey, it's turning on the AI agent. It's taking notes. Are you okay with it? Right? Did you guys get a message? Yeah, right. All right. But here's what that does. It listens to the session. It takes notes. And then when the session's all done and I terminate it after, I don't know, half hour, something like that, it's analyzed everything that was said in the session and it sends me not a transcript. It's not like repeating back everything that was said. It summarizes the information. It tells you what I talked about, what was important, what the next steps are, what are the goals, that kind of thing. It's pretty amazing. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, on your end, you can enable it as well. And I'm not really entirely sure about that. But here's kind of a really bizarre thought, right? And one of the tools I like a lot is the Google Notebook LM, right? And I've talked about that a few times, where you can take content that's delivered to you in virtually any format. It could be a web link, a video, a document, a book, whatever, a podcast, and you can feed it into this platform, and then that platform can convert it to something else for you. If you don't want to read the book, it can turn it into a podcast, or it can turn it into a document, like refactoring things. Or you can, once you've given it the information, you can ask it to create something new based on that information, even more mind blowing. And then also, gives you a way to interact with the content. So if you have questions about it, I'm like, I'm not sure I understand what an educational simulation is. You can just ask the chatbot that analyzed your information you fed it, and it will give you information about it based on the information you fed it. And then you can also allow it to do more research. Oh my God. It's like kind of crazy, right? And I'm telling you guys, because you guys are AI students, that is a killer tool. And it's free and it's attached to all of our gateway Google accounts. Just go to the apps icon, find Notebook LM, especially when you take classes with other people, right? Because I'm already using the tool to give you guys content for this course. But let's say you take a math class and they give you like a PowerPoint or an instructional document, feed that into Notebook LM and have it refactor it for you and see how much it helps you. You know, I think it's really pretty fascinating, especially if you've never tried it, right? So it's giving you different ways to learn. And really, think about this, and one of the reasons why I started using the tool a lot is I had somebody in my class that's like, you know what, I'd love to watch your videos, but I rarely have time. I do listen to a lot of podcasts at work. It's too bad your lectures aren't podcasts. And I'm like, I gotcha. Google Notebook LM will take my lecture and turn it into a podcast. It's freaking amazing. And I say that, you know, with all emphasis on, you know, nearly a bad word. It is really, truly amazing stuff. And then all of a sudden, he could just download the podcast, load it up on his device, and listen to it at work while he's working. And that works for him. You know, I think that's so cool, right? You can tailor things to the way you want to absorb them, right? In banking, they have a lot of fraud detection algorithms now, right? Um, I'll give you an example because I've been kind of targeted a few times and it happens to a lot of people. Went to a gas station, right? Okay, first I went to Costco, did some shopping. Then I went to a gas station to get some gas. Um, and then I go to another place to do some shopping. And apparently the gas station that I stopped at had a skimmer on it. And somebody grabbed my card number off that skimmer. And within minutes after skimming my card number, they tried to run like hundreds of transactions over my account. Not like big, not like $1,000, but like 10 cents, 50 cents, $2 over and over again. And the bank's AI software detected it and turned off my account. So like 10 transactions went through. They thought it was weird. They shut it down. I had to obviously had to call them, right? Um, and it was a whole process, but it's a thing that happens. How about this? You're traveling, right? Um, and I'm a big fan of like not using credit cards. I mean, have them, but really prefer not to use them. Traveling, and you're in Wisconsin, you drive down the road, all of a sudden you're in, let's say, St. Louis, right? Hit a quickie mart or something, and you go to buy a bag of chips and your card doesn't work. Why? Because the bank's like, wait, 2 hours ago or 5 hours ago, you were in Milwaukee. Now you're in St. Louis. How did that happen? That can't be real. So it doesn't allow the transaction. So, helpful tip if you ever travel, let your bank know that you're traveling so they make sure your card doesn't get locked out in remote places. This happened to me more than a couple of times, especially with big ticket things. Um, so they look for those anomalous transactions. Um, and another thing, right? Like if the fact that we can look at real time financial information now with AI and have it analyzed, crazy, truly. There's a number of different case studies they talk about here. And once again, I'm not going to go through each one of these and click the links. But what I want you guys to do is if you find one of these interesting, please follow the reference links and read up. Um, but here's one story where they talk about NVIDIA. And I think I did mention to you guys like the CEO of NVIDIA went to school right here in Wisconsin at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, literally like a mile from my house, right? And they have a whole NVIDIA lab there. And they arguably are making some of the most powerful processing chips now, GPUs mostly, but a lot of those are being used to drive AI. They are also using AI in their manufacturing processes, you know, go figure, to help make them better. So really interesting, you know, thing. They're basically digitalizing their factories, making them state of the art. A lot of places are doing it. So their factories kind of look like this because they're building electronic components. Notice how people are all suited up. Um, when I went to the Tesla plant in Reno, Nevada, um, directly adjacent in the same building, they had the Panasonic battery plant. So they would make the batteries in the same building that they're making the cars, so they don't doesn't have to travel. Smart, right? But they had a clean room like this, and before we could go into it, they were making like chips and batteries and stuff. We had to like take some layers of clothes off, go through this big machine that was basically like a blower and a vacuum that would remove all the particles from us. And then we'd have to put on a suit, and then we go through the blower again. And then we could walk into the room to see how they were doing things. Because if they get like a speck of dust in like their stuff, it like messes it up. So they have these like really weird facilities. It's kind of like being an astronaut working there, but that's how the stuff is done, folks, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Teofilo. That's exactly what that stuff is. Uh, right. All right. So looking at healthcare, right? A lot of organizations, and I do wonder. I always wonder, like, go to the doctor and you ask them a question, and they are like, I'm gonna have to think about that for a little bit, and then they run to the office and look it up in the book. What cures, I don't know, hangnails or whatever. But I think a lot of them now, I mean, because think of it, doctors have the same challenge that IT people do. Stuff, the knowledge is changing really quickly. There's so much you can't memorize it. Ideally, a doctor memorizes it, but they can't. Certainly, they're not going to memorize all your personal details. So, hey, if you can use AI to help you be more accurate, what do you think? Do that or not? Are you okay with a doctor that says, hey, man, I got to look this up and I'm not really sure? Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting. You know, it's kind of interesting to walk into a doctor's office and throw them a question that they can't answer, right? And then see what they do in the process of trying to answer it, right? Because often patients research stuff more than the doctors do before they go in for a visit, and then the doctors have to look it up too. Energy sector, right? So, um, Gen AI is being used there in a number of different ways. We talked about some of the strategies that they are employing. Um, Often it has to do with just monitoring sensor data, monitoring networks, or anticipating demand and ramping up for it in advance rather than guessing and guessing wrong. So that's a really big one. Good link on that one too. Um, all right. So there's challenges, right? So we are working organizationally typically, and organizations have issues in getting AI uh, out there. All right. We have this problem here at Gateway. We do not have necessarily the greatest training for our employees. Actually, I think Gateway actually does a pretty decent job of training us. And as a teacher, by the way, I have to continuously train. There's not a year that goes by that I'm not taking a course or going to a seminar or whatever, right? Doing some sort of training. Um, the question becomes, how good is the training material that you're focusing on, right? Is it really good? Is it valuable? There's a lot of issues too, right? The ethical and legal considerations. Do you want us here at Gateway to run an AI algorithm, let's say on your classroom performance, to predict how you're going to perform in the future? Hmm, right. We already talked about the bias of AI. Yeah, it is kind of a thing. Also, sometimes exposing AI to confidential data is a real problem as well. And these are really heavy things that big organizations deal with, by the way. When you start to put AI into place, okay, it does increase productivity, but guess what? You're going to be hitting the network harder, you're hitting the servers harder. AIs aren't necessarily free. Um, and all of that is computational resources and infrastructure adds to huge cost. Think of how many data center stories you hear. They're building a data center here, and they're building one here, and they're building one here, and now there's people starting to stand up and go, I don't think we want it here, right? um, so that's kind of a thing. Back to the bias and fairness issue. Depending on the data you train your model with, your AI can be biased. And this is really a scary thing. And I talked about this in previous sessions. Um, and if the data you're feeding it comes with biases, maybe it's just because that's the data you have. Um, that's going to propagate into the results of using the AI. This is a really big problem, by the way. The example that we used, I think it was last week, was that, for example, African American males are far more likely to be assumed to be a problem criminally than other people because the AI is looking at data that says that somehow, because they get more incarcerated unfairly, you know? And it is a horrifying thing when you stop and think about that, because if you're in that group, how would you feel? Not happy, I can tell you that, right? So this is an issue. What is really good though is some of the more modern models are starting to eliminate that bias. They are making inroads on that, and thank goodness, right? Um, all right. So when you use generative AI, I was using generative AI today to do some mundane tasks. OCRing uh, image text was one of them. But sometimes you can ask it like weird questions. And there's one thing you'll learn is there's a whole art to how you prompt an AI to give you information, right? Um, if you don't ask well and you're unclear, they can give you answers that are so complex and off tangent or way deeper conceptually that you can even manage. What do you do with that? Hey man, I just want a yes or a no. Should I order Pizza Hut pizza or not? Is it any good? And I can give you a quick answer on that one, but you can make your own judgments. The other thing that is a challenge too is, and we have this issue at Gateway, mind you, that we have generative AI available, a number of different tools, by the way. How do we apply that to the stuff we're already doing electronically? How do we merge those capabilities? And that's really kind of a challenge. Like, for example, I think it'll be really rare that we're going to see heavy AI in course shells because, well, it might have exposure to students' grades or history. I mean, I'm not comfortable with that, right? Um, in other cases, maybe it's a perfect thing. If we're looking at like, I don't know, enrollment numbers, um, energy uses, energy usage at a campus, whatever, who really cares, right? But if you're talking about personal details, that can be very problematic. Um, and there are some new tools. In fact, and I'll just show this to you, and I'm not trying to compromise anybody's privacy here, and I keep hitting the wrong Google Chrome tab, but I'm going to go to like some innocuous little Google app here to pull up the apps tab. But okay, so it doesn't appear there, but here in Google, and I don't know if you students have availability to it, but this was just added to um, Gateway, where here's a workflow tool. So this is, okay, so to explain very briefly what this tool does, I have not tried it yet through Gateway. I can set up an agent that creates a workflow. So like if I have like, let's say you guys send me an email asking to Zoom with me, I could set up a thing here that would automatically answer that email, set up an appointment for me, and get you to accept it, and maybe even prepare the materials we're going to cover in advance for me. Like, oh my God. And now it's built into our email platform. Can you guys do me a favor? Check your email account and see if you have a studio icon. I'm wondering if it's only for staff at this point. I'm assuming it probably is. Any okay, maybe that's good. Okay, Google, uh, go into Brightspace, find my assignment, complete the work, make it look like somebody turned it in that didn't know what they were doing. Like it's believable that it comes from a student, then turn it in for me, and then uh, cook me some microwave popcorn. Okay, so that's probably good that you guys don't have it, but I'm going to experiment with it and see what it does for me. All right, so that wraps our lecture here for tonight, and just barely with minutes to spare. Some reflection questions if you guys want to consider them. Of course, this stuff all comes from Intel. Here's the bibliography for this PowerPoint. Um, and folks, this video will end here.